They said the house of stones and logs was worthless, a crumbling relic too stubborn to fall and too broken to fix. But when Marcus Hayes, a single father drowning in debt, inherited it from the estranged man who abandoned him decades ago, what he found beneath the floors wasn't just hidden, it was worth $255 million, and it would either save his family or destroy everything he'd fought to build. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The fluorescent lights in the lawyer's office hummed with a frequency that made Marcus Hayes's teeth ache. Or maybe that was just exhaustion. He'd driven 4 hours from Riverside to Phoenix with his 7-year-old daughter Lily asleep in the back seat. Arrived at 11 at night. Slept 3 hours in a motel that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. Then spent the morning trying to make himself presentable for this meeting. His best shirt, the one he wore to parent-teacher conferences, had a small stain near the collar he'd tried to scrub out in the motel sink. It was still there, faint but visible, a reminder that no matter how hard he tried, something always showed through. Marcus was 34 years old, though the mirror, lately, suggested 40. His hands told the real story. Calloused palms, scarred knuckles, permanently stained with wood varnish and polyurethane that no amount of industrial soap could fully remove. These were working hands, honest hands, hands that had built cribs and bookshelves, repaired porches, and replaced rotted beams, hands that had held his daughter through every midnight fever and every nightmare about the mother who'd walked out when Lily was just 6 months old. These hands had done everything they could to keep them afloat, and still, it never felt like enough. Lily sat on his lap now, her small fingers tracing the stitching on his jacket sleeve, her brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. He'd managed that morning with only 2 tries. She was quiet, intuitive in the way children of single parents often are, sensing that something heavy hung in the air of this beige office with its leather furniture and framed diplomas. She didn't ask questions. She just leaned against his chest and waited. Her warmth, the only thing keeping Marcus tethered to the moment. Across the desk sat Jonathan Pierce, attorney at law, a thin man in his late 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He had the expression of someone who'd delivered bad news so many times it no longer registered as tragedy. Just another Tuesday afternoon of disappointed heirs and contested wills. He cleared his throat and slid a folder across the polished mahogany surface. The folder was surprisingly thin. Marcus had expected more, though he wasn't sure why. His father had never been a man of substance. At least, not that Marcus remembered. "Mr. Hayes," Pierce began, his voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who'd said these words 1,000 times before. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your father, Gerald Marcus Hayes, passed away on September 14th of a massive coronary infarction. He was 67 years old." Marcus nodded, but said nothing. What was there to say? Gerald Hayes had left when Marcus was 8 years old. One morning he was there, quiet and distant, but present, and by that evening he was gone. No note, no explanation, no phone call or letter in the 26 years since. Marcus's mother, already fragile, had shattered completely. She died when Marcus was 19. Her heart simply giving up like a clock that had wound down. Marcus had been angry then, furious at the man who'd destroyed their family, and didn't even have the decency to show up for her funeral. Now, sitting in this sterile office, learning that Gerald had finally died, Marcus felt nothing but a hollow sort of curiosity. "I didn't know he was in Montana," Marcus said quietly. Pierce nodded. He'd been living in Red Pine for approximately 31 years. Very small town, population under 500. He kept to himself, from what I understand. No close relationships, no social ties, worked odd jobs, mostly construction and carpentry. Marcus felt Lily shift in his arms. So his father had been a carpenter too, working with his hands, building things, maybe the only trait he'd passed down besides abandonment. "What did he leave?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer would disappoint. Men who walked away from their families didn't accumulate fortunes. They accumulated regrets. Pierce adjusted his glasses and opened the folder. "Your father's estate consists of one property, a residential structure located at 1647 Old Mill Road, Red Pine, Montana. The house sits on 42 acres of forested land. Construction is stone and log, approximately 3,000 square feet, built in the late 1980s and early 1990s. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The property assessment from the county values the land at roughly $82,000. The structure itself is listed as having negligible value due to," and I'm quoting the assessor's notes here, "significant structural concerns, lack of modern utilities, and remote location, making it unsuitable for conventional residential use." Marcus almost laughed. Even in death, his father managed to leave him with nothing. "So it's worthless." "Not worthless," Pierce corrected, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But it would require substantial investment to make habitable by modern standards. The property taxes are current through December 31st of this year. After that, you'd be responsible for approximately $2,300 annually." Lily tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy, what's negligible mean?" "Negligible," Marcus corrected gently. "It means not worth much, baby." Pierce slid a set of keys across the desk. 2 brass keys on a simple ring, worn smooth by decades of handling. "There is one more item." He produced a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, Marcus's name written across the front in shaky handwriting. "Your father left this with instructions that it be given to you upon his death." Marcus stared at the envelope for a long moment before taking it. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble in his hands. He opened it carefully, aware of Lily watching, aware of Pierce pretending not to watch. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal paper, the kind you'd find in any hardware store, covered in his father's unsteady script. "Marcus, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I left. I failed you in every way that matters. I can't undo 26 years of absence, and I won't insult you by trying to explain what can't be explained. But this house, this property, it's more than it looks. Don't let them tear it down. Don't sell it cheap. Trust your hands. Trust what you build. You have skills I gave you, even if I gave you nothing else. This place, if you look close enough, if you're patient enough, it will show you things. I'm sorry I couldn't be the father you needed. Maybe this is the only thing I can give you now. Trust yourself, son. You're stronger than I ever was. Dad." Marcus read it twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. His throat felt tight. His eyes burned, but he didn't cry. He'd stopped crying about Gerald Hayes when he was 12 years old. Pierce cleared his throat awkwardly. "The property is yours to do with as you wish. You can sell it. Though I should warn you that remote Montana properties with structures in disrepair are difficult to move. You could potentially demolish the structure and sell the land separately, though that would involve costs. Or, he paused, you could visit the property first. See what you're working with. Marcus looked down at the keys in his hand, feeling their weight, their history. 42 acres. A house his father built with his own hands. A place Gerald had chosen over his family, over his son. How far is Red Pine from here? Marcus asked. Pierce consulted his notes. Approximately 1,200 miles. About 18 hours of driving, give or take. That night, back in their apartment in Riverside, Marcus sat at their small kitchen table while Lily slept in the bedroom they shared. The apartment was cramped, a one-bedroom in a complex where the air conditioning barely worked and the neighbors fought loud enough to rattle the walls. Rent was $950 a month, due in 8 days. And Marcus had $673 in his checking account. His last carpentry job had finished 2 weeks ago, a deck repair that had taken longer than estimated and paid less than promised. He had 3 callbacks for potential work, but nothing guaranteed. This was life on the edge. Every month a calculation of which bills could wait, which couldn't. How far he could stretch a pack of chicken thighs and a bag of rice. He pulled out his laptop. The screen cracked from when Lily had accidentally dropped it last year, and searched for Red Pine, Montana. The town barely existed online. Population 473. 1 gas station, 1 church, a volunteer fire department. The nearest grocery store was 40 minutes away, in the next town over. He found a satellite image of his father's property and zoomed in slowly. The house sat at the end of a dirt road that wound through dense pine forest, surrounded by hills that looked more like small mountains. From above, the structure was clearly visible. Thick stone walls forming a rough rectangle, a steep roof, what looked like multiple chimneys. The stonework was unusual. He could see that even from the satellite image, the stones weren't random, field stones scattered haphazardly. They were cut blocks, fitted together with precision, creating patterns that suggested purpose beyond simple construction. Marcus leaned closer to the screen. The logs that framed the upper portion of the structure were massive, old-growth timber that didn't exist anymore. Not in lengths like that. Whoever had built this, and he knew it was his father, had done so with skill and obsessive attention to detail. This wasn't some thrown-together cabin. This was architecture. Marcus had been working with wood and stone his entire adult life. He'd apprenticed with an old German carpenter who'd taught him that every joint mattered, every angle told a story. He recognized craftsmanship when he saw it, even from a satellite image taken from space. Despite everything, despite the anger and the abandonment and the decades of silence, he felt something stir in his chest. Curiosity. And something else, a pull, like a hook lodged somewhere behind his ribs, tugging him toward Montana. He checked their finances again. The rent money wouldn't appear magically, but the truck, his beat-up 2006 Chevy Silverado, had half a tank of gas. If he was careful, if he drove straight through, if he packed food instead of buying it, he could make it to Montana for maybe $200. See the property. Assess whether it was worth anything. Maybe, if he was incredibly lucky, find something he could sell to keep them afloat another month. He pulled out his father's letter and read it again. Trust your hands. Trust what you build. This place, if you look close enough, if you're patient enough, it will show you things. What things? What could possibly be hidden in a worthless house in the middle of nowhere? But Marcus had learned one thing from years of carpentry work. Sometimes the most valuable things were hidden in plain sight, visible only to people who knew how to look. He made his decision. They'd go. They'd drive to Montana, see the property, and figure out what to do next. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was desperate. But desperation had become familiar territory. And foolishness was just another word for hope when you had nothing left to lose. The next morning, Marcus told Lily they were taking a road trip. Her eyes lit up with an excitement that made his chest ache. When was the last time he'd been able to give her something that made her smile like that? They packed everything they might need into the truck. Tools from Marcus's collection, sleeping bags, flashlights, a cooler filled with sandwiches and juice boxes, changes of clothes stuffed into a duffel bag. Marcus left a note for his landlord saying he'd be back with rent money by the end of the week. He didn't know if that was true, but he wrote it anyway. They left Riverside at dawn, the city still sleeping, streetlights flickering off as the sun began to stain the eastern sky pink and gold. Lily pressed her face against the window as they merged onto Interstate 10, heading north and east toward a place neither of them had ever been, toward a house built by a ghost, toward answers to questions Marcus hadn't known he was carrying. The drive took 19 hours. They stopped at gas stations and rest stops, Lily asking questions about mountains and pine trees and whether grizzly bears were really as big as cars. Marcus answered what he could and made up the rest. Anything to hear her laugh, to see her eyes brighten with wonder. They slept 4 hours in a motel outside Butte, Montana, where the night clerk looked at them with something between pity and suspicion, then continued north as the landscape transformed around them. The mountains rose like walls, pine forests so dense they seemed to swallow the light. The air changed, growing thinner, colder, carrying scents Marcus didn't have names for. This was wilderness in a way that California never was. Raw and ancient and indifferent to human presence. They reached Red Pine just after 3 in the afternoon on their second day of driving. The town was barely more than a wide spot in the road, a cluster of wooden buildings that looked transplanted from a century ago. The gas station, the church, a tiny post office, a general store with a faded Pepsi sign. People on the street stopped and stared as Marcus's dusty California truck rolled through. There were no stoplights, no chain restaurants, no signs of the modern world beyond a few satellite dishes on roofs. This was the kind of place people came to disappear. And apparently, that's exactly what his father had done. Marcus stopped at the gas station to ask for directions. The attendant, a weathered man in his 60s with suspicious eyes, looked at the address and grunted. "Old Hayes Place. You family?" "His son," Marcus said. The man's expression shifted slightly, something between surprise and what might have been respect. Didn't know Gerald had people. He kept to himself. Lived out there. Must be 30 years. Good with his hands, though. Fixed my porch steps once. Wouldn't take payment. Said he didn't need money. He gave Marcus directions, simple enough since there was only one road heading east out of town. Property's about 11 miles out. Road gets rough after mile marker 7. 4-wheel drive if you got it. Marcus nodded his thanks and pulled back onto the road, following the directions into the forest. The pavement ended after 3 miles, giving way to dirt and gravel. The road climbed steadily, winding through trees, so tall they blocked the sky. Mile marker 7 came and went, and the road became 2 ruts through undergrowth, branches scraping the sides of the truck like fingernails. Lily had gone quiet, sensing perhaps that they were entering a different world, a place where the rules she knew didn't quite apply. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. Marcus stopped the truck and just stared. The house rose from the hillside like something grown rather than built, like it had erupted from the earth itself. Stone walls, dark grey, almost black, climbed 2 full stories, each stone cut and fitted so precisely that Marcus could barely see the mortar between them. Massive logs, weathered to silver, formed the frame of the upper level, logs so thick it would have taken multiple men just to lift one. The roof was steep, covered in wooden shingles that had turned the color of storm clouds. Windows, small and deep-set, stared out from the stone like watchful eyes. It didn't look welcoming. It looked fortified. "Daddy," Lily whispered, "it looks like a castle." Marcus couldn't disagree. There was something medieval about it. Something that suggested defense, permanence, secrets. He parked the truck and stepped out slowly. The air here was different, colder despite the afternoon sun, sharp with the scent of pine, and something else, stone dust, maybe, or the smell of earth turned over and exposed. The ground around the house was covered in moss and fallen needles, but Marcus could see evidence of care. No broken windows, no sagging roof, no obvious decay. Whatever else Gerald Hayes had been, he'd maintained this place. They approached the front door, a massive slab of oak reinforced with iron bands and what looked like hand-forged hinges. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every detail speaking of hours, days, weeks of patient work. Marcus ran his hand along the wood, feeling the grain, the precision of the joinery. "This is hand-planed," he murmured, more to himself than to Lily. "Every inch." He pulled out the keys Pierce had given him. They slid into the lock smoothly. Too smoothly for a house supposedly abandoned for months. The mechanism turned with barely a sound, and the door swung open on hinges that didn't creak, didn't protest, didn't suggest years of disuse. Inside, dust floated in shafts of light that pierced through the windows. But the air wasn't stale. It was cool, dry, almost fresh. The main room was enormous, 20 feet high with exposed beam ceilings. Each beam, a single massive log spanning the width of the space. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, tall enough for Marcus to stand inside without ducking, wide enough to roast an entire pig. Furniture sat covered in white sheets, protecting shapes that suggested chairs, a couch, tables. Marcus pulled back one sheet, revealing a handmade wooden chair, solid oak, joints so perfectly fitted they'd last centuries. Every piece of furniture was the same, handcrafted, perfect, built to last by someone who understood that worth wasn't measured in speed or cost, but in permanence. "This is where Grandpa lived?" Lily asked, her voice small in the vast space. "Yeah, baby," Marcus said softly. "This is where he lived." They explored slowly, cautiously, like archaeologists entering a tomb. The kitchen had a wood stove, a hand pump for water. No electricity that Marcus could see. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms, each one simple but carefully appointed. Beds with hand-carved frames, wardrobes built into the walls. In what must have been his father's room, Marcus found more journals, stacks of them, covering years. He'd have to read them later. For now, he just stood there, trying to reconcile the man who'd built all this with the man who'd walked away from his family. It was Lily who noticed it first. "Daddy, why are some of the stones sticky-outy?" Marcus turned to where she was pointing at the wall near the fireplace. She was right. Some stones jutted out slightly, maybe half an inch, while others were recessed by the same amount. It created a subtle pattern, almost like braille for giants. Marcus approached the wall, running his hand along the surface. His carpenter's eye saw it immediately. This wasn't natural settling or poor construction. This was intentional. The stones were placed in a specific pattern, creating texture. Creating what? A message? A map? He pressed one of the protruding stones gently, feeling for movement. Nothing. He tried another. Still nothing. Then his finger caught on a stone near the corner, one that seemed slightly looser than the rest. He pressed it firmly. Click. The sound was soft but unmistakable. The sound of a mechanism engaging, of something releasing. A section of wall, perhaps 3 feet wide and 7 feet tall, shifted inward half an inch, revealing a seam that hadn't been visible before. Marcus's heart began to pound. He looked at Lily, whose eyes had gone wide. "What is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his mouth suddenly dry. He gripped the edge of the seam and pulled. The stone panel, surprisingly well balanced despite its weight, swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing darkness beyond. Marcus pulled out his flashlight and shone it through the opening. Stone steps, carved directly into bedrock, descending at a steep angle into the earth. The steps were worn smooth in the center, suggesting years, maybe decades of use. And at the bottom, barely visible in the flashlight beam, Marcus could see the faint outline of a tunnel stretching into blackness. His father's letter echoed in his mind. "This place, if you look close enough, if you're patient enough, it will show you things." Marcus stood there, flashlight trembling in his hand, looking down into a darkness that seemed to pull at him like gravity. His daughter stood beside him, small and trusting, believing he knew what to do next. But Marcus didn't know. He was a carpenter, a single father barely keeping his head above water, standing in a house he'd inherited from a man he'd hated, staring into a hidden passage that shouldn't exist. "Daddy." Lily's voice was small. "What's down there?" Marcus looked down at her, then back at the stairs, descending into the unknown. "I don't know, baby," he said quietly. "But I think maybe Grandpa left us something." Something in his gut told him that whatever waited below would change everything. Whether that change would save them or destroy them, Marcus had no way of knowing. But standing there at the threshold between the known and the unknown, between the life he'd been living and whatever came next, Marcus Hayes made a choice. He'd come this far. He'd driven 1,200 miles on hope and desperation. He'd inherited a worthless house from a father who'd abandoned him, and now that house was showing him a secret. He wasn't turning back now. "Stay right here," Marcus told Lily, his voice steadier than he felt. "Don't move, okay? I'm just going to check it out." But even as he said it, as he prepared to descend those stone steps, Marcus knew he was lying to himself. This wasn't just checking it out. This was stepping into his father's hidden world. This was finally, after 26 years, learning what Gerald Hayes had chosen over his family. This was the moment everything changed. And Marcus, despite his fear, despite his uncertainty, despite every rational thought screaming at him to close that door and walk away, took the first step down into the darkness. Marcus stood at the threshold, one hand gripping the flashlight, the other pressed against the cold stone wall for balance. The darkness below seemed alive, breathing, waiting. He turned back to Lily, who stood in the main room clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide and uncertain in the fading afternoon light. "I need you to be really brave right now, okay?" Marcus said, crouching to her level. "I'm going to go down these steps and see what's there, but you need to stay right here." Sit in that chair, hold Mr. Rabbit, and count to 100. Slowly. Can you do that? Lily's bottom lip trembled. What if something happens? Marcus cupped her face gently, his calloused thumbs brushing her cheeks. Nothing's going to happen. I'll be able to hear you the whole time. If you get scared, you call out my name, and I'll come right back up. I promise. Deal? She nodded, though her grip on the rabbit tightened until her knuckles went white. Marcus kissed her forehead, then stood and turned back to the hidden passage. He clicked on the heavy-duty flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a blade, and began his descent. The stone steps were steep, each one carved with precision from the bedrock itself. Marcus tested the first step carefully, pressing his weight down slowly. Solid. No give. No crumbling. These weren't makeshift stairs hacked out in desperation. These were engineered, designed to last centuries. He descended slowly, one hand trailing along the wall, the other holding the flashlight steady. The air grew colder with each step, but it wasn't the damp, musty cold of a basement. It was dry, almost sterile, like the inside of a bank vault. The walls were smooth, not naturally worn but deliberately carved and finished. Every few feet, Marcus noticed small ventilation holes, barely visible, suggesting air circulation, suggesting this place was meant to be occupied, used, maintained. 20 steps down, the passage leveled out into a tunnel. Marcus swept his flashlight across the space, his breath catching. The tunnel was approximately 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide. The walls and ceiling carved from solid rock, with a precision that shouldn't have been possible for one man working alone. The floor was level, perfectly so, and as Marcus ran the beam along its length, he could see it stretched forward into darkness for at least 50 feet before turning sharply to the right. "Daddy?" Lily's voice echoed down from above, thin and frightened. "I'm here, baby," Marcus called back. "Everything's okay. Keep counting." He heard her small voice resume counting, the numbers floating down like lifelines. 43, 44, 45. Marcus moved forward cautiously, his boots making soft sounds on the stone floor. The tunnel walls showed tool marks. Patient, methodical work done over months, maybe years. His carpenter's eye recognized the signs of someone who understood stone, who'd taken the time to do it right. Gerald Hayes had built this, alone, in secret, hidden beneath a house in the middle of nowhere. But why? The tunnel turned right, and Marcus followed it. The passage continued for another 30 feet, then opened suddenly into a chamber. Marcus stepped through the threshold and stopped, his flashlight beam sweeping across a space that made his chest tighten with confusion and wonder. The chamber was roughly 20 feet square, the ceiling arched, the walls lined with wooden shelving. But it was what sat on those shelves that made Marcus's hands begin to tremble. Crates. Dozens of them. Wooden military-style boxes with metal clasps and stenciled numbers on their sides. They were stacked neatly, organized by size, each one labeled with codes Marcus didn't understand. In the center of the room sat a wooden workbench, and on it a leather-bound journal, a kerosene lamp with a box of matches beside it, and what looked like inventory lists held down by a smooth river stone. Marcus approached the bench slowly, almost afraid to disturb anything, as if he'd stumbled into a museum after hours. He set his flashlight down carefully, struck a match, and lit the kerosene lamp. Warm light bloomed across the chamber, pushing back the shadows, revealing details the flashlight beam had missed. The crates weren't just randomly stored. They were catalogued, numbered in sequence, arranged with the same obsessive precision as everything else his father had built. Marcus picked up the journal with shaking hands. The leather was soft, well worn. The binding cracked from years of opening and closing. He flipped to the first page. The date at the top was 32 years ago. The handwriting was his father's. Stronger then, more confident. The letters formed with care. June 7th. First transport complete. 37 pieces, secured in location Alpha. No complications. Weather held. The work is harder than I expected. Not physically, but knowing what I'm hiding. What I'm protecting from people who would destroy it for profit. But this is necessary. They would sell it, scatter it, lose it to greed and corruption. Better hidden than lost forever. Better preserved than destroyed. Marcus flipped through more pages. Entry after entry spanning years. Each one detailed acquisitions, transfers, something called the collection. His father wrote about pieces, about securing items, about transport routes and careful planning. But what pieces? What collection? Marcus set the journal down and approached the nearest crate. His heart pounded as he unlatched it. The metal clasp opening with a soft click that seemed too loud in the enclosed space. Inside, wrapped in protective oilcloth and acid-free paper, was a painting. Marcus lifted it carefully, his carpenter's hands gentle despite their roughness, and unwrapped the protective layers slowly. The painting was small, maybe 18 by 24 inches, but the moment the cloth fell away, Marcus knew he was looking at something extraordinary. The colors were vivid despite their age. Rich blues and golds depicting a European countryside, rolling hills, a farmhouse, workers in a field. The brushstrokes were thick, expressive, applied with a confidence that spoke of mastery. And there, in the bottom right corner, a signature. Marcus's breath stopped. He knew that name. Everyone knew that name. This was impossible. His hands trembled as he rewrapped the painting and lowered it back into the crate with exaggerated care, as if it might explode. His mind raced. This had to be a reproduction, a copy. It couldn't be real. Real paintings like this lived in museums behind glass and security systems. They didn't sit in wooden crates in underground chambers beneath forgotten houses in Montana. Marcus moved to the next crate, unlatched it, unwrapped what was inside. A bronze sculpture, small but exquisite, depicting a dancer mid-movement, every muscle captured in metal. The patina suggested age, real age, not artificially applied. The base had a small plaque. Another name Marcus recognized from art history classes he'd barely passed in community college. His legs felt weak. He moved to a third crate. Ancient pottery, Greek or Roman. He couldn't tell which, but unmistakably old, unmistakably valuable. A fourth crate held manuscripts, illuminated pages behind preservation glass, text in Latin or maybe Old French, decorated with gold leaf and intricate marginalia. Each crate he opened revealed something more impossible than the last. This wasn't possible. This was millions of dollars worth of art and artifacts. How did his father, a man who'd worked construction jobs, a man who'd lived alone in the Montana wilderness, end up with any of this? Daddy? Lily's voice floated down from above, more distant now, worried. I finished counting. Marcus realized with a start that he'd lost track of time. I'm coming, baby. Just one more minute. But he couldn't leave yet. He needed to understand. He grabbed the journal again and flipped forward, scanning entries, looking for answers. The writing was dense, coded in some places. But gradually a story emerged. His father hadn't stolen these things. He'd been recruited, hired by something called the Severin Preservation Trust. They operated internationally, acquiring art and artifacts that were at risk during wars, political upheavals, economic collapses. Gerald Hayes had been one of their agents, a field operative chosen specifically because of his construction skills, his ability to build secure storage locations in places no one would think to look. Marcus read faster, the pieces clicking together. His father had spent his 20s and early 30s traveling, learning, building a network. Then he'd been assigned to create a permanent, secure location in North America. So he'd come to Montana, bought this land, and spent 10 years building this house, this fortress, and beneath it, this network of tunnels and chambers. But then something had changed. Marcus flipped to an entry from 15 years ago. The handwriting was more agitated, the words pressing hard into the paper. The trust has been compromised. People I thought were protectors have become profiteers. Victor wants to sell the Degas to a private collector in Dubai. Margaret has been negotiating with a Chinese businessman about the Tang dynasty pieces. They're talking about market value, about profit margins. They've forgotten why we started this. It was never about money. It was about preservation, about keeping pieces of human heritage safe until they could be properly returned, properly displayed, properly honored. I can't be part of this anymore. I won't watch them destroy everything we built. The next entry was dated 3 days later. I've made my decision. I'm taking the pieces under my protection and disappearing. They'll come looking eventually, but this location is secure. No one knows about it except me. Not even Marcus. God. Especially not Marcus. If they knew I had a son, they'd use him to get to the collection. Better he thinks I abandoned him than have him become a target. Better he hates me than ends up dead because of choices I made. This is the only way to keep him safe. Marcus's vision blurred. He read the passage again, then a third time. His father hadn't left because he didn't care. He'd left to protect him. Gerald Hayes had chosen to become a monster in his son's eyes rather than put his family in danger. The weight of that realization pressed down on Marcus like physical force, making it hard to breathe. Daddy. Lily's voice was urgent now, scared. Please come back. Marcus closed the journal, his hands shaking, and grabbed his flashlight. He moved back through the tunnel quickly, taking the steps 2 at a time, and emerged into the main room. Lily was standing exactly where he'd left her, tears streaming down her cheeks. He swept her into his arms, holding her tight. I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I lost track of time. She buried her face in his neck, her small body shaking with relief. You were gone so long. I got scared. I know. I'm here now. It's okay. He carried her to the couch and sat down, holding her close, waiting for her breathing to steady. When she finally pulled back and looked at him, her eyes were red but curious. What's down there? Marcus didn't know how to answer. How do you tell a 7-year-old that her grandfather spent decades guarding a secret worth more than most people would see in 1,000 lifetimes? A lot of really old, really important things. Things Grandpa was keeping safe. Like treasure? Lily asked, her eyes widening. Marcus smiled despite himself. Yeah, baby. Kind of like treasure. Are we rich now? The question hung in the air between them. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Were they? Legally? Did he even own what was down there? And if he did, what would he do with it? Sell it? To whom? And what about the people his father had been protecting it from? Did they know Gerald was dead? Would they come looking? I don't know, Marcus said honestly. But we're going to figure it out together. Okay? That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay on the couch, Lily curled up beside him in a sleeping bag they'd brought from home, and stared at the ceiling beams his father had placed with such care. His mind spun through 1,000 questions, each one leading to 10 more. Finally, as moonlight painted silver stripes across the floor, Marcus gave up on sleep. He grabbed his flashlight, checked that Lily was sleeping soundly, and descended back into the tunnel. This time, he went deeper, past the first chamber, following the passage as it branched and split into a network more complex than he'd realized. He found a second chamber filled with more crates, these containing gold bars, each one stamped with dates from the 1940s and 50s. He found a third chamber lined with filing cabinets, all locked, containing who knew what documents. He found a fourth chamber that made him stop and stare in genuine awe. This room was larger than the others, perhaps 30 feet square, the walls lined with custom-built shelving designed to hold paintings vertically. And paintings there were, dozens of them, each one wrapped and stored with archival precision. Marcus unwrapped one carefully. Renaissance era, he thought, though he was no expert. Religious imagery. Gold halos, the kind of piece that belonged in the Louvre or the Vatican. He rewrapped it with trembling hands and moved to the next. Medieval. Then, another. Baroque. Maybe. Each one more impossible than the last. At the center of this chamber stood a wooden desk, and on it, more journals. Marcus sat down and began to read by flashlight, losing track of time as his father's life unfolded in handwritten pages. Gerald Hayes had been recruited at age 24 by a man named Victor Severin, a wealthy European collector who'd watched the art world become increasingly corrupt, increasingly willing to let masterpieces disappear into private collections where no one would ever see them again. Severin had started the trust with a simple mission: preserve and protect cultural heritage until it could be properly returned to the people it belonged to. Gerald had been perfect for the work. He was skilled with his hands, meticulous, and had no family ties that could be exploited. Except that had changed when he'd met Marcus's mother, when Marcus had been born. For 8 years, Gerald had tried to balance both lives, the secret work and the family. But then the trust had given him an ultimatum. The collection was growing too large, too valuable. They needed a permanent, secure location, and Gerald was the only one they trusted to build it. It would require years of work, total secrecy, complete isolation. Gerald had agonized over the decision for months. Marcus found the entries, pages of his father wrestling with what to do. In the end, Gerald had made his choice. He'd left his family, taken the money the trust provided, bought this remote property, and spent the next decade building this fortress and its hidden vaults. By the time the construction was complete, Marcus was 18, his mother was dead, and Gerald had missed everything. His son's childhood, his wife's decline, every moment that mattered. But then the trust had betrayed him. Members had started selling pieces on the black market. The mission had been corrupted by greed. So Gerald had cut ties, taken the collection, and disappeared completely. He'd spent the last 15 years alone, maintaining this place, protecting these treasures, carrying the weight of what he'd sacrificed and what he'd preserved. Marcus closed the journal, his eyes burning. His father had given up everything for this. His family, his life, his chance at happiness, all to protect art and history from people who would destroy it for profit. Marcus stood and continued exploring, He found a fifth chamber containing what looked like religious artifacts, crosses, reliquaries, ancient texts. A sixth chamber held Asian art, scrolls, jade sculptures, ceramics that looked impossibly delicate. A seventh chamber was filled with Native American artifacts, each one carefully documented with notes about tribal origin and sacred significance. The scale was staggering. This wasn't just a collection. This was a museum's worth of cultural heritage from across human history, all hidden beneath a house that the county assessor had called worthless. Marcus found himself in a narrow passage he hadn't noticed before, one that sloped downward and turned sharply. He followed it carefully, his flashlight beam picking out details: more ventilation holes, electrical conduits running along the ceiling, suggesting his father had eventually added power to some areas. The passage opened into what could only be described as a command center. Modern, or at least relatively so, with equipment that looked like it had been installed in the last decade. There were computer monitors, though powered off, server equipment humming quietly, and walls covered with maps, photographs, and what looked like security schematics. Marcus approached the desk in the center of this room. Unlike the others, this one held modern technology. A laptop, closed, external hard drives stacked neatly, file folders organized with obsessive precision, and a white envelope with Marcus's name written across the front in his father's handwriting. Marcus picked it up with shaking hands and opened it. Inside was a letter, dated 3 months before Gerald's death. Son, if you're reading this, then you've found the first chambers. You're probably overwhelmed, confused, maybe angry. I don't blame you, but you need to understand something. Everything down here, every piece, every artifact, it's documented. I have provenance for all of it, records of where it came from, who it belonged to, why it needed to be protected. None of it is stolen. All of it was saved from destruction, from war, from greed. The laptop contains everything: the full catalog, high-resolution photos, historical research, legal documentation. The password is your birthday, month, day, year, no spaces. What you do with this collection is your choice. You can sell it and live comfortably for the rest of your life. You can contact museums and return pieces to their countries of origin. You can keep it hidden like I did. But whatever you choose, know this: there are people who know this collection exists. They've been looking for it for 15 years. Some of them are criminals. Some are wealthy collectors willing to pay any price. And some are members of the original trust who feel betrayed and want revenge. If you decide to do anything public with this collection, you'll become a target. But if you keep it hidden, you'll be carrying the same weight I carried, the same isolation, the same sacrifice. I'm sorry I have to leave you with this choice. I'm sorry for everything I put you through. But I believe you're stronger than I was. You have Lily. You have something to live for beyond this collection. That makes you better equipped to handle this than I ever was. The house and everything in it is legally yours. I made sure of that. But the responsibility, that's something only you can decide to accept. Trust your instincts. Trust your hands. You've always been able to fix broken things. Maybe you can fix what I broke too. I love you, son. I always did, even when I couldn't show it. Dad. Marcus sat down hard in the desk chair, the letter trembling in his hands. The full weight of what he'd inherited crashed down on him like a collapsing building. This wasn't just property. This was a fortune. This was history. This was danger. and it was all sitting on his shoulders now, crushing the air from his lungs. A sound made him freeze. Footsteps above. In the house. Multiple sets of footsteps. Heavy. Moving with purpose. Marcus's blood turned to ice. He'd left Lily alone. He grabbed his flashlight and ran, sprinting through the passages, taking turns he'd memorized. His heart hammering with terror. He burst into the first chamber, crossed to the tunnel entrance, and took the stone steps 3 at a time. He emerged into the main room and stopped cold. 3 men stood there. They weren't police. They wore tactical clothing, black jackets, boots built for rough terrain. One of them was holding Lily. She was crying silently, frozen with fear. The man holding her looked at Marcus with cold, professional eyes. "Marcus Hayes, we need to talk about your father's collection." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "Let her go." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "First, you're going to show us what's down there, and then we'll discuss terms." Marcus looked at his daughter, terrified in a stranger's grip, and felt something crystallize inside him. His father had sacrificed everything to protect what was hidden beneath this house. He'd given up his family, his life, his chance at happiness. He'd chosen the collection over his son. And now Marcus understood why. Because some things were bigger than one man's life. Some things were worth protecting, even at terrible cost. But Marcus wasn't his father. Gerald had chosen the collection over family. Marcus would choose differently. He'd figure out how to protect both. He had to. Because looking at Lily's terrified face, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that he'd burn every painting, melt every gold bar, destroy every artifact, before he'd let anything happen to his daughter. The collection was worth millions, but Lily was worth everything. And whoever these men were, whatever they wanted, they'd just made a terrible mistake. They'd threatened the only thing in the world that mattered more to Marcus Hayes than his next breath. Now they'd learn what happened when you backed a father into a corner, when you gave him nothing left to lose. Marcus met the man's cold eyes and said quietly, "You have no idea what you just started." The moment stretched like glass about to shatter. Marcus stood at the threshold of the hidden passage, every muscle in his body coiled tight, while 3 men in tactical gear occupied his father's house like they owned it. The one holding Lily was tall, maybe 6'3", with a kind of calm expression that came from doing terrible things with practiced efficiency. His grip on her shoulder was firm but not brutal, a warning rather than a threat. Yet, the man in the center, clearly the leader, was shorter, stockier, with graying hair cut, military short, and eyes that catalogued everything in the room with predatory awareness. He hadn't drawn a weapon, but Marcus could see the bulge of a holster beneath his jacket. The third man stood by the door, blocking the only exit, arms crossed, face expressionless. "Let me be clear about something," the leader said, his voice carrying a faint accent Marcus couldn't place. "Eastern European, maybe. We're not here to hurt anyone. We're businessmen pursuing an asset that belongs to us. Your father stole something very valuable 15 years ago. We've been looking for it ever since. Now, we've found it. We just need you to be reasonable." Marcus forced himself to breathe slowly, to think through the panic screaming in his head. "I don't know what you're talking about. My father died 3 months ago. I inherited a house, that's all." The man smiled without humor. "Mr. Hayes, we watched you arrive 2 days ago. We watched you discover the hidden door. We tracked the heat signature of your body moving through the tunnel system for 47 minutes last night. We know exactly what's down there, Because we've been monitoring this property for 3 years, waiting for Gerald to make a mistake. His death was inconvenient, but you're actually better. You're motivated by simpler things. Money, your daughter's safety. Those are levers we can work with. Marcus's mind raced. They'd been watching. For years, which meant they'd probably been watching his father, too, waiting for an opening. Gerald had known. That's why he'd lived alone. Why he'd stayed isolated. He'd been protecting the collection from people like this. What do you want? Marcus asked, keeping his voice steady. Access. The man said simply. We're going to go down into those tunnels together. You're going to show us everything. We're going to catalog what's there. And then we're going to negotiate a reasonable distribution of assets. Some pieces belong to our organization by right of original acquisition. Others, well, we're willing to purchase at fair market value. And if I refuse? The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked meaningfully to Lily. I don't think you'll refuse. You're a single father. Your rent is 3 weeks overdue. You have $600 in your bank account and no job prospects. We're offering you a chance to walk away wealthy. Why would you refuse that? Because my father died protecting this, Marcus thought. Because he gave up everything to keep it away from people like you. But out loud, he said, Fine, but let my daughter go. She doesn't need to see any of this. The man considered, then nodded to his colleague. Take her upstairs. Keep her comfortable. If Mr. Hayes cooperates, she'll be eating dinner with him tonight. The tall man guided Lily toward the stairs. She looked back at Marcus, her eyes pleading. Daddy? It's okay, baby, Marcus said, his voice cracking despite his effort to stay calm. Just go with him. I'll be right up. I promise. She disappeared up the stairs, and Marcus felt a part of himself go with her. The leader gestured toward the hidden passage. After you, Marcus descended the stone steps, the 2 men following close behind. Their flashlights joined his, pushing back the darkness. When they reached the first chamber, the leader stopped and whistled low. Jesus. Gerald really did take everything. He approached the nearest crate and opened it, removing the painting Marcus had discovered the day before. He unwrapped it carefully, professionally, and examined it under his flashlight. Renoir. Countryside landscape. 1883. This was taken from a private collection in Lyon during World War II, recovered by Allied forces, then went missing during transport to a Paris museum in 1946. Your father acquired it in 1992 from a dealer in Prague who had no idea what he actually had. The man looked at Marcus. You understand what you're looking at. This single painting is worth between $8 and $12 million at auction. And this, he gestured around the chamber, is just the beginning. They moved through the tunnel system, the leader opening crates with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd memorized inventory lists. Each item he identified made Marcus's stomach clench tighter. A Monet, a Degas, a Caravaggio that had been thought destroyed in a fire, Greek pottery from the 5th century BC, Roman coins, medieval manuscripts. Each piece came with a story, a provenance, a value that made Marcus's head spin. In the gold chamber, the leader spent 10 minutes counting bars, checking serial numbers against a list he pulled from his pocket. Approximately 470 bars, Nazi gold, recovered from a bank vault in Austria, never returned to rightful owners because the paperwork was deliberately destroyed. Current value, roughly $22 million. Your father didn't steal this, by the way. He legitimately saved it from being melted down and sold by corrupt officials. They reached the command center, and the leader's eyes lit up when he saw the computer equipment. "Is this operational?" "I don't know," Marcus lied. "I haven't turned anything on." The man powered up the laptop. It booted quickly, asking for a password. He looked at Marcus expectantly. Marcus hesitated, then entered his birthday. The system unlocked, revealing folders upon folders of documentation. The leader clicked through them rapidly, his expression shifting from satisfaction to something approaching awe. "My God!" He catalogued everything: high-resolution images, provenance research, legal documentation, authentication certificates. "This is better than we hoped." He opened a folder labeled Master Inventory and scrolled through an Excel spreadsheet with hundreds of entries. At the bottom, a summary line: total estimated value, $255 million USD. Marcus felt the floor tilt. He'd known it was valuable, but seeing the number, black and white, undeniable, made it real in a way that had been abstract before. $255 million. Hidden beneath a house the county had assessed as worthless. His father had been sitting on a fortune that could have changed everything, and he'd chosen to live in isolation, protecting it, preserving it, giving up his entire life for it. The leader leaned back in the chair, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Hayes, let me explain something about the Severin Preservation Trust. Your father's former employers were not thieves. They were collectors who genuinely believed in protecting cultural heritage. But like all organizations, they eventually corrupted. About 15 years ago, a faction emerged that wanted to monetize the collections, sell pieces to private buyers. Your father was one of several guardians who disagreed and chose to disappear with their assigned pieces." He paused, letting that sink in. Most of them were eventually found. Some cooperated, some didn't. Your father was unique because he built something truly secure. This location, this house, it's a masterpiece of hiding in plain sight. We admire that, which is why we're willing to negotiate rather than simply take what we want. "You keep saying we," Marcus said. "Who are you?" What happens next will force Marcus to make an impossible choice between his daughter's safety and his father's legacy, reveal the true scale of the danger surrounding them, and show him that some treasures carry prices far beyond money. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The man smiled. "My name is Victor Klein. I represent a consortium of collectors and former trust members who have legitimate claims to portions of this collection. Some pieces were originally acquired by people who are now my clients. Others were entrusted to the trust by families who want them back. We're not villains, Mr. Hayes. We're businessmen trying to resolve a very complicated situation. By threatening my daughter," Klein's expression hardened. "By providing appropriate motivation, you're an intelligent man. You must understand that the moment your father died, this situation became unstable. The collection can't stay hidden forever. Eventually, word gets out. Eventually, less scrupulous people than us find out. People who would kill you and your daughter without hesitation and tear this place apart. We're actually your best option. What do you want from me?" "Partnership. You sign over legal ownership of the property and its contents to our consortium. In exchange, you receive $20 million, tax-free, deposited in an account of your choosing. You never speak about this to anyone. You take your daughter and disappear. Build a new life. Be wealthy. Be safe." Marcus looked around the command center, at his father's meticulous records, at the decades of work represented in these files. "And if I refuse?" Klein stood slowly. "Then things become unpleasant. Your daughter has an accident. You have an accident. The property burns to the ground with you inside. And my people spend the next 6 months excavating the ruins and recovering what they can. We'd prefer not to go that route. It's messy, expensive, and we lose pieces to fire damage. But make no mistake, Mr. Hayes, we are leaving here with this collection. The only question is whether you're alive to spend your share." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to protect what his father had died protecting. But Lily's terrified face flashed in his mind. What good was protecting Art if his daughter ended up dead? What kind of father would he be if he chose his father's legacy over his own child's life? "I need time to think," Marcus said quietly. "You have 24 hours, Klein replied. "We'll be back tomorrow at this time. Have your answer ready." He powered down the laptop and stood. "One more thing. Don't bother calling the police. We have people in the local sheriff's department. They'll tell you there's nothing they can do about a property dispute. And if you try to move any pieces, we'll know. We're watching." They left Marcus standing in the command center, his mind churning. He waited until he heard their vehicles drive away, then sprinted up to find Lily. She was curled up on his father's bed, crying silently. He gathered her into his arms and held her until her breathing steadied. "Who were those men?" she whispered. "Bad people," Marcus said honestly. "Are they coming back?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't lie to her, but he couldn't tell her the truth either. Instead, he just held her tighter and tried to figure out what the hell he was going to do. That night, after Lily finally fell asleep, Marcus went back down to the command center. He needed to understand what he was really dealing with. He powered up the laptop and began reading through his father's files systematically. What he found painted a picture far more complex than Klein had suggested. Gerald Hayes hadn't just been a guardian. He'd been a detective, a researcher, a historian. For every piece in the collection, he'd spent months, sometimes years, tracking down its original owners or their descendants. The Renoir. The rightful owners were a Jewish family whose great-grandparents had been forced to sell it for pennies while fleeing Nazi Germany. The family had been trying to locate it for 70 years. The Degas? Stolen from a museum in Poland during the Soviet occupation. The museum had been rebuilt, but could never afford to replace their lost masterpieces. Page after page, Marcus found the same thing. These weren't just valuable objects. They were pieces of history that belonged to specific people, specific communities, specific nations. And his father had been trying to figure out how to return them properly. How to navigate the complex web of international law, competing claims, and institutional corruption that made repatriation almost impossible. In a folder labeled Active Threats, Marcus found profiles on Victor Klein and his organization. Klein was former intelligence, East German Stasi before the wall fell, who'd transitioned into black market art dealing. His consortium was a front for what amounted to organized crime. Wealthy clients who paid premium prices for pieces they could never display publicly. They weren't interested in preservation or repatriation. They wanted to possess, to own, to profit. But there were other threats too. A Chinese businessman who'd been trying to acquire the Tang dynasty pieces for his private museum. A Russian oligarch who collected religious artifacts and wasn't particular about how he obtained them. An American hedge fund manager who saw art as just another asset class. And then there was Richard Tanner. Marcus clicked on Tanner's file. The photo showed a man in his 60s, distinguished-looking, with silver hair and expensive clothes. But his eyes had a hardness that made Marcus's skin crawl. According to Gerald's notes, Tanner had been one of the original Severin Trust members, one of its most respected curators. He'd also been the one who'd proposed monetizing the collection, who'd tried to convince other guardians to sell pieces on the black market. When Gerald had refused and disappeared, Tanner had made it his personal mission to find him. The last entry in Tanner's file was dated 6 months before Gerald's death. Confirmed sighting in Red Pine, Montana. Small town. Population under 500. Gerald may have been there for years. Need to confirm before alerting Klein's people. If we can reach Gerald first, convince him to cooperate, we can cut Klein out entirely and control the entire collection. Marcus felt cold dread settle in his stomach. Tanner had found his father. Maybe that's why Gerald's heart had failed. Maybe the stress of knowing he'd been discovered had literally killed him. And now Tanner was still out there, probably planning his own move. Klein might have gotten here first, but he wasn't the only threat. Marcus spent hours going through the files, trying to understand the full scope of what he'd inherited. The collection wasn't just valuable, it was historically significant. Museums around the world would give anything to display these pieces. Governments would want them returned to their countries of origin. Families would weep to have their heritage restored, and criminals would kill to possess them. His father had understood all of this. That's why he'd stayed hidden. That's why he'd sacrificed everything. He'd been trying to protect the collection until he could figure out how to return it properly, how to navigate all the competing claims and dangers. But he'd run out of time, and now the weight of that impossible choice had fallen on Marcus. He could take Klein's money and disappear. $20 million. He and Lily would never worry about rent or food or anything else ever again. But it would mean betraying his father's life work. It would mean these pieces ended up in private collections, hidden away, lost to the world forever. It would mean the families who'd lost them would never get them back. Or he could refuse, fight, try to do what his father had been trying to do, but that would put Lily in danger. It would make them targets. And Marcus didn't have his father's resources, his father's knowledge, his father's decades of experience dealing with people like Klein. He pulled out his phone. Still no signal. He'd have to drive into town to make calls. But who would he call? The police? Klein had people in the sheriff's department, the FBI? And tell them what? That he'd inherited a fortune in art that his father had been hiding illegally for 15 years. That would end with the government seizing everything and Marcus possibly facing charges. Marcus put his head in his hands. He understood now why his father had looked so tired in the few photos Marcus had found. This weight, this impossible responsibility, it ground you down. It made you old before your time. It forced you to make choices no one should have to make. A sound made him freeze. Footsteps above. Again, but different this time. Lighter, more cautious. Someone trying to be quiet. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and moved to the tunnel entrance. He'd left the hidden door partially open. Through the gap, he could see a beam of light sweeping across the main room. Someone was in the house. Not Klein's people. They'd left hours ago. This was someone else. Marcus watched as a figure moved into view. Older man, late 60s, well-dressed even in tactical gear. He moved like someone who'd done this before, professionally, carefully. And when he turned toward the hidden door, Marcus saw his face clearly in the moonlight, filtering through the windows. Richard Tanner. Marcus pulled back into the shadows, his heart hammering. Tanner approached the hidden door, examined it, ran his fingers along the stone wall, finding the trigger mechanism with practiced ease. He pressed it. The door swung open, and Marcus realized with sickening clarity that he was trapped. If he went up, Tanner would see him. If he stayed down here, Tanner would find him anyway. And Lily was upstairs, alone, asleep. Marcus made his decision. He moved silently through the tunnels, through passages he'd explored, to the emergency exit his father had mentioned in his notes. He found it at the far end of the complex, a vertical shaft with iron rungs leading up to a concealed hatch. He climbed quickly, pushed the hatch open, and emerged into the forest 50 yards from the house. Cold night air hit him like a slap. He could see lights on in the house now. Tanner wasn't hiding his presence anymore. Marcus circled wide, keeping to the trees, until he had a clear view of Lily's window. The light was still off. She was still asleep. He needed to get to her before Tanner did. He approached the house from the back, finding a window he could force open. He climbed through into the kitchen, moving silently across floorboards he'd learned by now. He reached the stairs and started up, testing each step for creaks. Halfway up, he heard voices. Tanner was talking to someone on a phone. Yes, it's exactly where Gerald's note suggested. The entire network. I need a team here by morning. Full extraction crew. Tell them to bring the heavy equipment. We're taking everything. A pause. What about the son? If he cooperates, we bring him in. If not, well, loose ends are your department. Marcus reached the top of the stairs. Lily's door was closed. He moved toward it, hand outstretched for the knob. Behind him, a floorboard creaked. He spun around. Tanner stood in the hallway, gun drawn but pointed at the floor. The two men looked at each other in the dim light. Mr. Hayes, Tanner said quietly, we need to talk about how you're planning to kill me. Marcus replied, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Lily. Tanner sighed. I heard you. Klein made you his offer. Let me make you mine. $50 million. You and your daughter go into witness protection. New identities. Full security. In exchange, you testify that you found this collection and voluntarily turned it over to the proper authorities. We catalog everything. Return pieces to their rightful owners through proper legal channels. The families get their heritage back. Museums get their masterpieces. And you get to be a hero. Thank you for watching. And then why should I trust you more than Klein? Because unlike Klein, I'm not a criminal, Tanner said. I made mistakes 15 years ago. I got greedy. I compromised the trust's mission. But I've spent the last decade trying to fix that. I work with law enforcement now, with international agencies. I help repatriate stolen art. This collection, Marcus, it's my chance to make things right, to finish what Gerald started. Marcus wanted to believe him. God, he wanted to, but his father's notes had painted Tanner as the villain, the betrayer, the man who'd destroyed everything. My father didn't trust you. Your father was paranoid, Tanner replied. Justifiably so, perhaps. But he also trapped himself. He couldn't return these pieces because he'd held them illegally for too long. He couldn't sell them because that would betray his principles. He couldn't even die peacefully because he knew the moment he was gone, people like Klein would come. He built a prison for himself. Marcus, don't make the same mistake. Behind the closed door, Marcus heard Lily stirring. She'd wake soon, frightened, calling for him. He had seconds to decide. Trust Tanner. Trust Klein. Trust no one. Each choice led down a different path, and he couldn't see where any of them ended. "I need time," Marcus said finally. Tanner lowered his gun. "You have until morning. My team arrives at dawn. If you're still here, I'm assuming you've accepted my offer. If you're gone, well, then you've made a different choice. But Marcus, understand this. Klein won't let you walk away. And there are others. The Chinese businessman, the Russian collector. Your father kept them at bay through sheer will and paranoia. You don't have that luxury." The moment news of Gerald's death hit certain networks, this location became a target. You're standing in the center of a battlefield, and you don't even know who all the players are yet. He turned to leave, then paused. "Your father was a good man who made hard choices. He saved pieces of human history that would have been lost forever, but he also abandoned his family to do it. Don't make the same mistake. Your daughter needs you more than the world needs a Renoir." Then he was gone. Footsteps fading down the stairs. Marcus heard a door close, a vehicle start. Silence. He opened Lily's door. She was awake, sitting up in bed, clutching her rabbit. "Daddy?" I heard voices. "Daddy? Daddy? Daddy? Daddy?" Marcus sat beside her and pulled her close. "Just someone looking for directions. They're gone now. When can we go home?" Home. Their cramped apartment with the broken air conditioning and the fighting neighbors. $950 a month they couldn't afford. But it was theirs. It was safe. It was simple. "Soon, baby. Soon." But even as he said it, Marcus knew it wasn't true. There was no going back to simple. Not anymore. He'd opened Pandora's box when he'd discovered that hidden door. And now forces were in motion that he couldn't stop. Klein would be back in the morning. Tanner's team would arrive at dawn. Others would come. And Marcus, a carpenter from California with $600 in his bank account and a 7-year-old daughter to protect, was suddenly the guardian of $255 million worth of human heritage. His father had carried this weight for 15 years. Could Marcus carry it for even one day? He held Lily close and stared out the window at the dark forest, wondering which of the shadows held people watching, waiting, planning. The house was no longer a refuge. It was a target. And Marcus had no idea how to protect his daughter from the storm that was coming. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in the darkness of his father's bedroom with Lily curled against him, her breathing soft and steady, and tried to find a path forward that didn't end with either betraying his father's legacy or getting his daughter killed. By the time pale dawn light began seeping through the windows, he'd made his decision. It was risky, maybe even reckless, but it was the only play he could see that didn't involve surrendering to criminals or spending the rest of his life running. He gently moved Lily to the bed, covered her with a blanket, and went downstairs. From the kitchen window, he could see 2 vehicles approaching up the dirt road. Tanner's team, right on schedule. Marcus grabbed his phone and the keys to his truck. He needed to get to town before Klein's people showed up. He needed to make calls, and he needed to do it now. He scribbled a note for Lily. "Baby, I had to run into town for something important. Stay in your room. Don't open the door for anyone. I'll be back in 1 hour. I promise. Love, Daddy." He left it on her pillow, kissed her forehead, and climbed out the back window. The truck started on the second try, thank God. Marcus drove down a service road his father had cut through the forest, one he'd found on the property maps in the command center. It bypassed the main entrance entirely, coming out on the highway 3 miles south. As he drove, he saw Tanner's vehicles turning into his father's driveway. They'd find an empty house, and they'd wait. He had maybe 2 hours before they started getting aggressive. Red Pine's general store opened at 6 a.m. Marcus was waiting outside when the owner, an older woman named Sarah who'd known his father, unlocked the door. "You're Gerald's boy," she said, not unkindly. "Heard you'd come to claim the property." "Yes, ma'am. I need to use your phone. Mine doesn't get signal out there." She gestured to an old rotary phone behind the counter. "Help yourself. Coffee's free if you're family." Marcus grabbed the coffee gratefully and started making calls. The first was to the FBI field office in Helena. He asked for the art crime team and was transferred 3 times before reaching a duty agent named Sarah Chen. "This is Special Agent Chen. How can I help you?" Marcus took a breath. "My name is Marcus Hayes. My father was Gerald Hayes. I believe he was a person of interest in connection with stolen art from the Severin Preservation Trust." There was a pause. "Is your father willing to cooperate?" "My father died 3 months ago. I inherited his property. And I've discovered a collection of approximately 173 pieces of art and artifacts hidden beneath the house. I'm looking at an estimated value of $255 million. And I have multiple criminal organizations currently trying to take possession of it by force." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mr. Hayes, I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't go back to the property. Don't touch anything else. I'm dispatching a team now. Give me your location." Marcus gave her the address of the general store. "Agent Chen, I need you to understand something. These pieces, my father documented where they came from. He has provenance, original owners, families who've been searching for them. He wasn't a thief. He was protecting them until they could be properly returned." "I understand. We'll sort all of that out. But first, we need to secure the site and ensure your safety." "You said multiple criminal organizations." Marcus explained about Klein, about Tanner, about the others his father had documented. Chen listened without interrupting, then said, "I know Richard Tanner. He's been working with us for about 8 years, helping us recover pieces. He's legitimate, but Victor Klein is on our watch list. If he's there, we need to move fast." Tanner's people arrived about 20 minutes ago. "Klein is supposed to return this morning with my answer to his offer." "What offer?" $20 million in exchange for signing over the collection." "Jesus. Okay. I'm calling in support from state police and the county sheriff. We'll have people there within the hour. Do not go back to that property, Mr. Hayes. Your father kept this secret for 15 years, and it probably cost him his life. Don't make the same mistake." Marcus hung up and made his second call, this one to the local sheriff's office. He reported armed intruders on his property, gave the address, and was told deputies were on their way. If Klein had people in the department, they'd know he'd made the call, which meant the clock was now ticking very, very fast. He made a third call, this one to the one person he thought might actually understand what he was trying to do. He dialed the number from his father's emergency contacts list, a curator at the Smithsonian named Dr. Elizabeth Warren. She answered on the second ring, sounding alert despite the early hour. "Dr. Warren, speaking. My name is Marcus Hayes. Gerald Hayes was my father." A sharp intake of breath. "Is he? He passed away 3 months ago. But before he died, he left me something, and I think you might be able to help me figure out what to do with it." 30 minutes later, Marcus was back in his truck, racing toward the house. Agent Chen had been clear, stay away. But Lily was there, and no amount of art crime team protocols mattered more than his daughter. He'd called Sarah Chen back and told her he was going in. She'd been furious but professional. We're 15 minutes out. Do not engage. Do not confront. Just get your daughter and get clear. Marcus pulled up to the house to find organized chaos. Tanner's people had established a perimeter. Professional security contractors in tactical gear. But they weren't alone. 2 sheriff's vehicles blocked the driveway, and 3 black SUVs, Klein's, were parked at angles, suggesting they'd arrived in a hurry. Marcus could hear shouting from inside the house. He approached one of Tanner's security people, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I need to get my daughter. She spoke into a radio, listened, then nodded. Mr. Tanner says you can go in. But stay close to the walls and don't make sudden movements. Things are tense in there. Marcus entered through the front door and found a standoff. Klein and 2 of his men stood near the fireplace. Tanner and another man, older, distinguished, wearing a suit despite the early hour, stood near the hidden passage entrance. 2 sheriff's deputies tried to look authoritative, but mostly looked confused. And Lily sat on the couch, wide-eyed, clutching her rabbit. Daddy! She ran to him, and Marcus swept her up, holding her tight. Klein turned toward them. Mr. Hayes, I believe we had an agreement. You were supposed to have an answer for me. I have an answer, Marcus said. It's no. Klein's expression hardened. That's unfortunate. I really hoped you'd be reasonable. FBI art crime team is 5 minutes out, Marcus said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I called them this morning. I've cooperated fully. Whatever happens here, it's happening with federal witnesses. Klein's jaw tightened. He looked at his men, calculating odds, then back at Marcus. You just made a very expensive mistake. No. The man in the suit beside Tanner said, stepping forward. You did, Mr. Klein. My name is Jonathan Pierce. I'm Mr. Hayes's attorney. I've just filed paperwork with the federal court, establishing a preservation trust with Marcus Hayes as executor. Any attempt to remove items from this property now constitutes theft from a legal entity. And since we've documented your threats against my client and his minor daughter, we'll also be filing for restraining orders. Marcus blinked. Pierce, the lawyer from Phoenix. When had he gotten here? Tanner smiled faintly. I called him last night, told him you might need representation. He drove through the night. DeBron, the sound of vehicles approaching made everyone turn. FBI, state police, and more sheriff's deputies flooded the property. Agent Sarah Chen came through the door with her badge raised and her presence immediately commanding the room. She was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that missed nothing. Everyone stay where you are. Mr. Klein, I believe we have some outstanding questions for you regarding black market art trafficking. She nodded to state troopers, who moved to flank Klein and his men. You have the right to remain silent. What happened next blurred into a chaos of activity that lasted hours. Klein and his people were arrested and led away. Tanner sat down with Agent Chen, producing documentation that showed he'd been working with the FBI for years, helping them track down stolen art. The older man with him was revealed to be a representative from Interpol's Cultural Property Division. Marcus sat on the porch steps with Lily, while federal agents documented everything. The collection, piece by piece, was photographed, catalogued, verified against his father's meticulous records. Dr. Warren arrived by helicopter, accompanied by representatives from the State Department and several major museums. The worthless house in the middle of nowhere had become the center of one of the largest art recovery operations in modern history. It took 3 days for the initial assessment. Marcus and Lily stayed in a hotel in the nearest real town, protected by federal marshals. During those 3 days, Marcus met with more lawyers, bureaucrats, and officials than he'd met in his entire life. The legal situation was extraordinarily complex. Some pieces had clear ownership and could be returned immediately. Others had competing claims that would take years to resolve, and some belonged to institutions or countries that no longer existed in their original form. But through it all, one thing became clear. His father had been right to protect them. Nearly every piece in the collection would have been destroyed, lost, or locked away in private holdings if Gerald hadn't intervened. The Renoir went back to the French family who'd lost it. They wept when they saw it. The Polish Museum received their Degas. The curator's hands shook as he touched the frame. Piece after piece found its way home, and each reunion was a small miracle. The question became, what to do with the pieces that had no clear home? What to do with the house, the tunnels, the infrastructure Gerald had built? And what would happen to Marcus and Lily? Jonathan Pierce laid out the options one evening in the hotel room. You could accept payment for facilitating the recovery. The government is prepared to offer compensation. Not Klein's 20 million, but substantial, enough to be comfortable. Or, Marcus asked, or you honor your father's vision. You establish a real foundation, the Hayes Preservation Trust. Make this house a center for art restoration, research, and education. Display pieces on loan from museums. Create apprenticeship programs. Turn Red Pine into a destination for people who care about cultural heritage. Lily looked up from her coloring book. Would we live here? If you wanted to, Pierce said. The property is legally yours. But it would be a commitment. Years of work. Constant attention. Your life would never be simple again. Marcus thought about his father. Alone in this house for 15 years, protecting treasures no one knew existed. He thought about the families who'd gotten their heritage back. He thought about Dr. Warren's words when she'd seen the collection. Your father saved pieces of human memory. Some things, once lost, can never be recovered. He made sure that didn't happen. I want to build something, Marcus said quietly. I've been fixing other people's broken things my whole life. Maybe it's time to build something that lasts. The next 6 months transformed everything. Marcus moved back to the property with Lily. Federal funding, combined with grants from cultural organizations and donations from grateful museums, financed the renovation. The house became the public face of the foundation, converted into galleries and research spaces. The tunnels, once secret, became climate-controlled storage and restoration workshops. Security was installed, proper and professional, protecting not from discovery but from theft. Marcus hired staff, conservators, art historians, educators. He brought in the retired German carpenter who'd taught him his trade, now elderly but still sharp, to teach traditional techniques to young apprentices. He established partnerships with universities and museums, and slowly, impossibly, the worthless house became a beacon. Red Pine transformed too. The tiny, dying town suddenly had purpose. A coffee shop opened to serve visiting researchers. A bed and breakfast, a small restaurant. Jobs appeared. Young people stopped leaving. The high school started offering courses in art history and conservation, taught by foundation staff. The town that had mocked Gerald Hayes for building a stone fortress in the woods now understood he'd been building their future. Lily thrived in ways Marcus had never seen. She had space to run, clean air to breathe, and dozens of adults who treated her like she mattered. She developed a fascination with art restoration, spending hours watching conservators carefully clean centuries-old paintings. At 8 years old, she could explain the difference between tempera and oil paint, between Roman and Greek pottery styles. She'd found her grandfather's journals and read them like adventure novels, understanding in her child's way that he'd been a kind of hero. One evening, almost a year after they'd first arrived, Marcus stood in what had been his father's bedroom, now converted into his own office. The sun was setting over the Montana hills, painting the stone walls gold. Lily appeared in the doorway. "Daddy, there's someone here to see you." Marcus went downstairs to find an elderly woman standing in the gallery, staring at a painting they'd just put on display, on loan from the Louvre. She had tears streaming down her face. "My grandmother painted this," she whispered. "I never thought I'd see it. I thought it was lost forever." Marcus stood beside her. "Your grandmother was talented. She was murdered at Auschwitz. But before that, before the war, she was an artist. My father told me stories about her paintings. He described this one, the valley where she grew up, but I never saw it. Never imagined I would." She looked at Marcus. "You're Gerald Hayes's son." "Yes, ma'am. Your father saved my grandmother's memory. This painting, it's the only proof she existed, that she created beauty before the world became ugly. Thank you. Thank you for finishing his work." After she left, Marcus found himself back in the command center, now a proper archive with controlled humidity and professional storage. He pulled out his father's journals and read the final entry again. "I don't have much time left. The work is finished. Everything is here, everything I swore to protect. I failed my son in every way that mattered. But maybe, just maybe, this will give him a chance I never had. If you're reading this, Marcus, then you found it. Don't be afraid. What's down here isn't stolen. It was saved. Trust yourself. You'll know what to do." Marcus pulled out a pen and added his own entry below his father's final words. "Dad, I understand now. You didn't abandon us because you didn't care. You left because you cared too much about something bigger than yourself. I'm not sure I would have made the same choice, but I'm grateful you did. Because of you, pieces of human history survived. Families got their heritage back, and a worthless house in Montana became a place where broken things get restored. Not just art, people too. You were right. I did know what to do. I built something that lasts. I hope, wherever you are, you can finally rest. Your work is complete. And your legacy, it's not hidden anymore. It's alive." Marcus. The foundation's official opening came in the spring, 18 months after Marcus had first discovered the hidden door. Dignitaries attended, museum directors, art historians, news cameras. But the guests Marcus cared about most were the families, dozens of them, whose lost treasures his father had protected. Some came to see pieces being returned to their home countries. Others came to view items on temporary display. All of them came to say thank you to a man they'd never met, and to his son who'd chosen to honor his father's impossible mission. Marcus gave a brief speech, standing on the stone steps his father had built by hand. Lily stood beside him, nearly 9 now, tall for her age, confident in ways that made his heart swell. "My father was not a perfect man," Marcus began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "He made choices I didn't understand, He left when I needed him, and for most of my life, I hated him for that." He paused, collecting himself. "But he spent 30 years protecting pieces of our shared human story, not for profit, not for recognition, but because he believed they mattered. He believed that art and history and memory were worth preserving, even at terrible personal cost. And he was right." Marcus looked around at the transformed house, at the town that had found new life, at his daughter, who now understood her grandfather's sacrifice. This foundation exists to continue his work, to protect cultural heritage, to return stolen pieces to their rightful owners, to train the next generation of people who believe preservation matters. But more than that, it exists to prove that broken things can be fixed, that worthless isn't a permanent condition, that with enough care, enough patience, enough love, anything can be restored. He looked down at Lily. "My daughter asked me once if we were rich, and I told her I didn't know. But standing here now, looking at what we've built together, I can finally answer her. Yes, baby. We're rich, not in money, but in purpose, in meaning, in the knowledge that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, and that's worth more than any amount of gold." The crowd erupted in applause, but Marcus barely heard it. He was looking at the stone walls his father had placed with such care, thinking about the man who'd lived here alone for 15 years, carrying an impossible weight. He wished Gerald could see this, could see that his sacrifice hadn't been in vain, that his son had finally understood. That night, after the crowds left and the house grew quiet, Marcus walked through the galleries with just a flashlight, like he'd done that first night. But now the darkness wasn't threatening. It was peaceful. He reached the entrance to the old tunnels, now converted into proper museum space, and descended. At the bottom, where the first chamber had been, there was now a memorial. A simple plaque with Gerald Hayes's name, dates, and a single line, "Guardian of memory, protector of heritage, he chose to preserve." Beside the plaque, in a shadow box, was the first key his father had given him, worn smooth by decades of use. And next to that, Marcus had placed the compass necklace from his father's note. "So you never lose your way." "I found it, Dad," Marcus whispered to the stone walls. "I found my way, and I'm making sure Lily finds hers too." He heard footsteps on the stairs. Lily appeared, wrapped in a blanket, eyes sleepy. "Couldn't sleep?" Marcus asked. She shook her head and came to stand beside him. "I was reading Grandpa's journals. He wrote about you, you know, near the end." "He did. He said you were the strongest person he knew, because you kept going, even when things were hard, because you didn't run away." She looked up at him. "He said he hoped you'd forgive him someday." Marcus's throat tightened. "What do you think? Should I forgive him?" Lily considered this, with the seriousness only children possess. "I think he was doing his best. Like you do. You always tell me that doing your best is all anyone can do, even if your best is hard." Marcus pulled her into a hug. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm 9 in 3 months, she said matter-of-factly. "That's basically grown up." They stood together in the chamber that had once held secrets and now held memory. Above them, the house Gerald Hayes built stood strong against the Montana night. Around them, the town that had once mocked the stone and log fortress now thrived because of it. And inside Marcus Hayes, the anger he'd carried for 26 years had finally transformed into something else. Not forgiveness, exactly. Something more complex. Understanding. Acceptance. Peace. his father had been given an impossible choice: family or mission. He'd chosen mission and paid with loneliness and his son's love. But he'd also saved pieces of human heritage that would have been lost forever. Now Marcus had been given the same choice, but he'd found a third option. He'd chosen both. He'd protected his daughter and honored his father's legacy. He'd turned a secret into a gift. He'd transformed a burden into a beacon. Some people said Gerald Hayes had wasted his life in isolation, protecting art no one could see. They said he'd thrown away his family for nothing, but they were wrong. He'd thrown away his family for something. And now, finally, that something had purpose, had meaning, had light. The carpenter from California who'd inherited a worthless house had become the director of one of the most important cultural preservation centers in North America. The struggling single father who'd counted pennies had become a guardian of priceless heritage. The abandoned son had become the man who ensured his father's sacrifice meant something. And the house of stones and logs that everyone said was worthless, it had been hiding $255 million in treasure all along. But the real treasure wasn't the art or the gold. It was the lesson Marcus had learned. That worth isn't measured in money. That broken things can be fixed. That fathers and sons can understand each other, even across death and silence. That sometimes the most valuable inheritances are the ones that look worthless at first glance. Marcus carried Lily back upstairs, tucked her into bed, and stood by her window looking out at the forest. Tomorrow, more researchers would come. More pieces would be catalogued, studied, returned to grateful hands. More apprentices would learn to restore what time had damaged. More families would reunite with lost heritage. The work would continue, as it always did, as his father had always intended. But tonight, Marcus just stood in the house his father built and felt grateful for the impossible inheritance, for the daughter who made every struggle worth it, for the community that had embraced them, for the chance to build something meaningful from broken pieces. Anyone can change the world if they're willing to see value where others see waste, to protect what others abandon, and to believe that broken things still deserve to be saved. Marcus Hayes hadn't just inherited a house. He'd inherited a mission, and in completing it, he'd discovered something his father never had. That you didn't have to choose between love and legacy. That you didn't have to sacrifice family for purpose. That the strongest foundations were built not from stone and logs, but from the choice to stay, to fight, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. As dawn broke over the Montana hills, Marcus Hayes stood in the doorway of the house everyone called worthless and watched the sun paint the stone walls gold. The carpenter, who'd arrived with $600 and a truck full of doubts, was now the guardian of $255 million in human heritage. But more than that, he was a father who'd protected his daughter, a son who'd honored his father, and a man who'd proven that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones people say aren't worth saving. The house of stones and logs wasn't worthless. It never had been. It just took the right person to see what was hidden underneath, to trust his hands, to build something that would last, to turn a secret into a legacy and a legacy into a gift for the world. Marcus's father had spent 15 years protecting the collection. Now Marcus would spend the rest of his life sharing it. Different choices, same purpose. And in that difference, a broken relationship was finally, impossibly, healed. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories of hidden legacies and second chances waiting for you. Click to discover what else is buried beneath the surface. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the things the world calls worthless might just be priceless.